Burkina Faso and Europe, a fragile relationship in a shifting geopolitical landscape. The current relationship between Burkina Faso and Europe reflects one of the most complex and volatile situations in African geopolitics. It is marked by military coups, jihadist insurgencies, unprecedented humanitarian crises, and a growing mistrust toward the former colonial power France. This video offers an in-depth analysis of the country's current political context, the key players involved, alarming data about the ongoing crisis, and potential solutions to a conflict that has already displaced millions and threatens the stability of the entire Sahel region. The current political landscape, coups, military rule, and a break with the West. Burkina Faso has been under military rule since the January 2022 coup that overthrew the democratically elected president, Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, due to his inability to curb jihadist violence. In October 2022, another coup brought Captain Ibrahim Traoré to power. Since then, he has ruled the country with an iron fist, indefinitely postponing the promised elections. A key development came in May 2024, when, after negotiations widely boycotted by the opposition, the military junta announced it would remain in power for another 5 years. The regime has intensified its crackdown on opposition forces, the media and civil society, with reports of journalists and activists being abducted. In January 2024, Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, announced its withdrawal from ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, restricting citizens' ability to seek justice through the regional court. In July 2024, the three countries signed a treaty establishing the Confederation of Sahel States, further distancing themselves from Western institutions, deteriorating ties with Europe and France. Relations with Europe, particularly with France, have sharply declined. Traoré's government has repeatedly accused France of interference and expelled French troops from the country. In search of new strategic partners, Burkina Faso has turned to nations like Russia via the Wagner Group, Iran and Turkey. This geopolitical shift reflects a growing anti-Western sentiment among the population, who associate the French presence with the failure to contain jihadist insurgents. The root of the crisis: escalating jihadist violence. The main driver behind the coups and ongoing instability remains the jihadist insurgency, which has intensified since 2015. Groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State control vast areas of the country, impose blockades on cities, and block access to food and humanitarian aid. Alarming security statistics, 2024. Between January and August 2024, an estimated 6,000 civilians were killed in conflict-related violence. In just the first half of the year, jihadist groups carried out 259 attacks, resulting in over 100 civilian deaths. Security forces remain overstretched and under-equipped, unable to guarantee basic protection for the population. Burkinabe forces and pro-government militias, human rights violations and civilian abuses. Pro-government militias in Burkina Faso, particularly the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, VDPs, alongside the national military, have also been implicated in widespread human rights abuses. Between January and August 2024, they reportedly executed at least 1,000 civilians in extrajudicial killings. During the same period, over 2 to 3 million people were forced to flee their homes, including 2.1 million internally displaced persons and 200,000 refugees in neighboring countries. 2024 was marked by several particularly brutal attacks. In August, fighters from the GGNIN killed at least 133 civilians who were digging a defensive trench in the town of Barcelona. In February, the army summarily executed 223 civilians, including 56 children, in the villages of Nondin and Soro, in what was allegedly a retaliatory operation following a jihadist attack. The government's strategy of arming civilian militias, the VDPs, has been highly controversial. While they have partially compensated for the shortage of regular troops, VDPs have often been accused of committing abuses, particularly against Fulani communities suspected of collaborating with jihadist groups. These actions have fueled a vicious cycle of ethnic violence, a deepening humanitarian catastrophe. The combination of armed conflict, climate change, and weak governance has created one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. The statistics are staggering. Key humanitarian data, 2025, 5.9 million. People, about 25% of the population, are in need of humanitarian assistance. 3.7 million are targeted by the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan. $792 million is required for humanitarian operations in 2025. 2 million children urgently need access to education, with 20% of schools closed due to insecurity. 1.3 million people require nutritional support, as acute malnutrition rates continue to rise across the country. Burkina Faso and Europe, a strained and historical relationship. The relationship between Burkina Faso and Europe, especially France, remains deeply shaped by the colonial past. Between 1894 and 1904, French forces violently invaded what was then known as Upper Volta, devastating communities, homes, and farmlands. Although the country gained independence in 1960, significant dependency on France continued for decades. In recent years, this relationship has severely deteriorated. In 2022, Burkina Faso followed Mali's lead by demanding the withdrawal of French troops. The military junta has since actively promoted anti-Western rhetoric, accusing France of interfering in domestic affairs and even supporting jihadist groups. Seeking new alliances, the Traoré government has turned to Russia via the Wagner group, as well as Iran and Turkey, for military and economic support. Exit from ECOWAS and isolation from Europe. The country's exit from ECOWAS, a regional bloc historically influenced by Europe, has deepened its isolation. In response, the European Union has scaled back its engagement and aid to Burkina Faso. As the junta consolidates its power and distances itself from traditional Western partners, Europe's withdrawal and the shifting balance of power. Following the military coups in Burkina Faso, European nations, especially France, have significantly scaled back their engagement with the country. With the notable exception of humanitarian aid, this strategic withdrawal has created a vacuum that other global powers are rapidly moving to fill, reshaping the geopolitical balance in the Sahel region. Who is paying the price? The victims of the crisis. The primary victims of this multifaceted crisis are the Burkinabe civilians. Over 2 million people live in extremely precarious conditions, often without access to food, clean water, or adequate shelter. Women and children account for 55% of the humanitarian aid target population and face elevated risks of gender-based violence, forced recruitment, and family separation. Rural communities, including farmers and herders, have lost their livelihoods as ongoing violence makes farming and pastoralism impossible. The consequences of the conflict extend beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Impacts on Europe. Loss of influence. The withdrawal of French troops in Burkina Faso's exit from ECOWAS have reduced Europe's ability to influence political developments in the region. Migration pressure. Although not as severe as in other crises, the instability in the Sahel continues to contribute to irregular migration routes toward Europe. Regional security threats. The expansion of jihadist groups in the Sahel poses a long-term threat to European security interests. Possible solutions and the path forward. Resolving the crisis in Burkina Faso will require innovative and multilateral strategies, including neutral international mediation, engaging impartial mediators and African countries not directly involved in the conflict to facilitate dialogue between the military junta and armed groups. Discrete communication channels. Establishing informal channels with jihadist leaders to explore the possibility of local ceasefires. Integrated humanitarian development approach. As proposed in the 2025 Humanitarian Response Plan, linking emergency aid with long-term development programs is essential. Rebuilding basic services. Prioritize the reconstruction of essential health, education, and water infrastructure in relatively stable areas. Community-based support. Strengthen local protection mechanisms and resilience by investing in grassroots, capacity building, and empowering local communities. Adaptive agriculture and security sector reform. Climate change continues to exacerbate the conflict in Burkina Faso, making climate-resilient agriculture a vital part of the response strategy. Promoting adaptive farming techniques can help communities maintain food production under increasingly harsh conditions. At the same time, reforming the security sector is crucial. This includes enhanced training and supervision of the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, VDPs, to reduce human rights abuses and improve civilian protection. Stronger coordination between security forces and humanitarian actors is also essential to ensure that operations do not undermine humanitarian access and aid delivery. Renewed European engagement. Europe must reconsider its approach to Burkina Faso and the Sahel region. This means moving beyond a purely security-driven and post-colonial mindset. A more effective strategy would involve supporting African-led initiatives without imposing rigid political conditions, maintaining humanitarian assistance, even in politically challenging environments, prioritizing local needs and long-term stability over short-term strategic interests. Conclusion: a deep-rooted crisis with complex solutions. The crisis in Burkina Faso is one of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time. It is the product of armed insurgency, weak governance, climate change, and the toxic legacy of colonialism. The civilian population bears the brunt, with millions displaced, hungry, and cut off from essential services. Europe, in turn, faces the erosion of its influence in the region, increasingly replaced by actors like Russia. To regain relevance, Europe must abandon paternalistic and securitized approaches and instead offer genuine partnerships that respond to the priorities of local populations. The window to prevent an even greater humanitarian disaster is closing fast. Without a coordinated international response and a fundamental shift in the way the conflict is approached, Burkina Faso risks descending even deeper into chaos, with devastating repercussions for the entire Sahel region and beyond.